Hello and welcome to Global Eye. 6 days after surviving an assassination attempt, former U.S. President Donald Trump took the stage at the Republican National Convention in Wisconsin to accept the party's nomination for the presidency. This is the third time for Trump to be nominated as the Republican Party's candidate for the country's top job. In a speech that went on for a record 90 minutes, Trump initially tried to present himself as a unifying figure. He said, and I quote, "Together we will launch a new era of safety, prosperity and freedom for citizens of every race, religion, color and creed." End of quote. But the call for calm and harmony was short-lived as he called undocumented immigrants as criminals. He said, "We will not let countries come in, take our jobs and plunder our nation." Trump also promised to lower inflation. He said, "I will end the devastating inflation crisis immediately, bring down interest rates and lower the cost of energy." Meanwhile, Joe Biden is reportedly more open to dropping out of the presidential race. Washington Post reported that top Democrat leader Nancy Pelosi saying that Biden is close to making a decision on ending his campaign. At least 22 Democratic members of Congress have openly asked Biden to back out. We're now joined by Pramit Pal Chaudhary, head of the India practice at the Eurasia Group, also Harsh Pant, Vice President of Studies and Foreign Policy at the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Pramit, if I could begin with you, do you think the assassination attempt on Donald Trump and how he has reacted to it in the last few days and also in the Republican National Convention, do you think this adds more momentum to his campaign?
I think the numbers are pretty clear. He was already doing reasonably well thanks to President Biden's senior moments, both at the presidential debate and elsewhere. And in the 6 swing states that will determine the Electoral College and therefore the presidency, we had been seeing Trump, who was already leading in about 4 out of the 6, depending on the polls you saw, is now very clearly leading in 6 out of 6. And not only that, in 3 other states, which were not seen as in play, we've seen Trump pick up numbers as well. It puts him either neck on neck or just ahead of Biden. So the Electoral College is now, I think, about 80 Electoral College votes in favor of Trump. As I said, it's a number of different factors, but there seems to be some evidence that Trump's, the assassination, the relative aplomb with which Trump has handled it, has helped bring a lot of independent voters who were skeptical of Trump, even though they were to some degree conservative. And what it definitely has done is that the entire Republican base has rallied to him. You have to remember that about 1 out of every 5 Republican voters, while they didn't necessarily like Biden, would have preferred another candidate than Trump.
Right. Important points there. He also spoke about the largest deportation operation in U.S. history, in a way showing a very strong stand on immigration policies. Let me go across now to Harsh Pant. Harsh, what do you think about Trump's stand when it comes to issues like immigration, Mexican people coming into the United States, crossing the border? Do you think he will come harder compared to his previous campaigns in this election?
I do think that this is going to be the focal point of his campaign. And as we have seen in the speech as well, this was a very important part. And I think this is something that rallies the base. As the MAGA Republicans, if there is an issue that motivates them, that mobilizes them, that rallies them, it is anti-immigration. And I think that's why there is a sense that this issue has always been big as far as Mr. Trump was concerned. If you look at his past record, even then it was a big deal. And I think on that front, he managed to change the political debate in the country with Mr. Biden also, and the Democrats also acknowledging that there is a dissatisfaction. Of course, their approach was slightly different, but I don't think that his approach towards immigration was negated by the Biden administration in a wholesale manner, as was perhaps expected in Mr. Biden's term. So I think that perhaps shows where the domestic politics has moved on this issue in the US, and it's unlikely to go away. And the more he hardens his stance on this issue, the more likely he's able to mobilize his own base and also perhaps put the Democrats on the defensive. Which is that they really do not have a good counter to this question, because seemingly it is having an impact on the American public, and the Democrats have not really responded with a coherent narrative on this, let alone Mr. Biden's follies in terms of articulation and his health crisis. But on the fundamental issue, on the conceptual issue,
right,
also there has not been a serious response.
Right. Let me go back to Pramit. Pramit, at this point, we know that President Biden is unwell. He's down in Delaware. He's got COVID-19. There are calls for him to step aside for somebody like Kamala Harris. Do you think that is now likely to happen, with a growing number of Democrats like Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, all asking him to step aside? Otherwise, there is no chance for the Democrats to actually win this election. How would it be if someone like Kamala Harris were to fight against Donald Trump?
Well, Kamala Harris also doesn't defeat Trump if you go by the polls. She does better than Biden, and definitely she has a stronger standing, or has greater confidence among Democrat voters. But again, in the swing states that really decide this election, her standing is not that much better than Biden. I think she trails in about, I don't think all of the states have been polled regarding her in a matchup, but I think she trails in about 4 out of the 6. So it's not, she improves the chances, she improves the odds, but she does not guarantee victory for the Democrats, who the Republicans still very much would have the advantage, even if she were to come in. Now, it's important to realize that we're getting reports, we don't know if they're confirmed, that Biden will make a call on stepping down this weekend. But he plans not to endorse Kamala Harris. He will just leave it open to the Democratic convention to decide, in which case you will effectively have a micro primary election within the convention taking place, in which possibly as many as 4 or 5 candidates will then fight with each other, with Kamala Harris being, we assume, having an advantage, simply because she is the vice presidential candidate, but not guaranteed to win. And it's interesting that if you were to get a Gretchen Whitmer or maybe a Gavin Newsom, especially Whitmer, because she comes from one of the swing states and herself, comes from that segment of the northern Midwest, which is in many ways crucial to this election, then you could get a much, much closer fight than if you were to have Kamala Harris running. But right now, that's still speculative, and I think Biden is a famously stubborn man, and he will take a lot of convincing, not just that having people like Obama and so on telling him that he needs, or Pelosi needs to step down, to basically say that. So we'll see what happens on the weekend. But I would say that even without him, it's still advantage Republican.
Right. Even without him, it is advantage Republican, and that's what several polls are saying in the United States right now. Going back to Harsh, even if, as Pramit was pointing out, if they change the candidate for president right now, Donald Trump, along with J.D. Vance, how do you think this combination is when it comes to winning the presidency? What is it that Donald Trump does not have? What are the rough edges, which in a way J.D. Vance brings to the table?
See, I think, Parikshit, this election, of course, has once again boiled down to rallying the base. And I think whichever combination the Democrats pick, as Pramit was speaking earlier, there is no guarantee that there'll be enough enthusiasm for the candidate for the Democrats to come out in numbers that perhaps would be needed to defeat Mr. Trump at this point, given the numbers and given the momentum that Mr. Trump has made it possible for himself over the last few days in particular. But I think with what I think Mr. Trump and J.D. Vance has been able to do is rally the base in ways that perhaps one could not have predicted even a few months back. Because what has happened now is that a lot of the centrist Republicans have, of course, coalesced around Trump presidency. You would recall the primaries where it was a very bruising primary for Mr. Trump, and almost all of his rough edges, as you pointed out, were being displayed. Where candidate after candidate, like Nikki Haley, for example, they were coming out and targeting him from multiple vantage points. That he cannot be a unifier, he cannot be a president that speaks for all conservatives, let alone all Americans, and what he had done in the past, the way he had mismanaged COVID and the way he mismanaged the economy. All those issues were coming out quite categorically. Now, what I think since then, what has happened is that given the circumstances and given how the field of the play has evolved, all of these candidates today are singing his praises, and they are now coming together, as we saw during the convention, to support his candidacy. And with Vance, I think the advantage that there is that, of course, he appeals to a wider audience. Of course, he also underscores some of the points that Mr. Trump brings to the table. But again, his wife being of Indian origin, for example, also makes the basket bigger, the basket of constituents bigger for the Republicans. And in that sense, I think the whole, of course, we have seen Vance himself being attacked by the MAGA Republicans because of his wife. But I think broadly, what has happened is that a lot of the centrists and a lot of the traditional conservatives, traditional Republicans, also see in Trump today a candidate that is ready to lead once again. So I think that space that has changed, the stage that has changed in some ways for Mr. Trump, allows him for a more potent candidacy than perhaps we had assumed a few months back.
Right. Pramit, when you heard his acceptance speech, what did you notice was different this time in Donald Trump's campaign approach? And also, do you feel that the insurrection, the riots at U.S. Capitol on the 6th of January 2021 are no longer an issue in this election?
Well, the riots of January 6th are no longer an issue, definitely for the base of the Republican Party, and probably seems a fair number of independent voters. In many ways, I think a lot of the public has basically said, let the courts decide in terms of especially Trump's role in that affair. But the Supreme Court has basically seems to have indicated all of this, even if it's going to come to trial. Trump is effectively has immunity. And in addition, as a president from many normal criminal issues. And on top of that, he just has to wait until after the election, where if he becomes president, he has immunity anyway. On the speeches on the Republican, on the Republican manifesto and so on, I think a couple of things are striking. One, it's, if you look at, and also Trump's interviews after the assassination bid, he comes out a lot softer in the interviews in the New York Post and elsewhere. He talks about wanting to unify America, unify the world. He tries, at least at the Republican convention, at the beginning of the speech at least, as you mentioned, to position himself as non-racist, as inclusive in terms of races and so on, and other people. And that may be a consequence of having a life-threatening moment. It's well known that some people have that impact. But he has kept to one point, as you mentioned. He knows that illegal migration is in many ways one of the strongest issues that the Republicans have to play, that even among Democrats, many Democrats, definitely among independents, this is a big concern. But I also found it interesting that if you look at the Republican manifesto and his subsequent statements, he's avoided attacking gay marriage. He has just said we support, the Republican Party supports the sanctity of marriage. He hasn't come out against gays, and so on. He's been very careful to water down a lot of the religious stuff about Christianity, about a Christian white nation, and so on. So it's very clear he's tacking to the center on a certain number of areas which he believes are important for winning center votes. He's held out on immigration. And on the foreign policy side, he's retained a certain isolationist stance, at least regarding Russia, a softer approach on Russia. And that he seems to be holding to. On the other area, I should add that he's also been very reluctant to come out against his abortion. And in many ways, that is the one issue where the Democrats, in theory, would have an advantage, because even among Republicans, especially among Republican women, abortion is something, the ban on abortion is not something they support. And it's noticeable that Trump, in the manifesto, and it seems he personally demanded that there should be no language on abortion that would look like he's supporting the ban on abortion.
Right. One final question to Harsh. Harsh, briefly, if you can tell us how a Trump presidency could change things for India-US relations. It's always said that, be it Republicans or Democrats, there is always consensus on how they view India and approach the India-US relationship. But could you expect any kind of changes, any hardened stand on India?
I do think that I think the biggest issue as far as Trump presidency is concerned will be, and it was there in the past and will continue to haunt India and almost all of America's partners in the future, is the sheer unpredictability. I think it's as you say, we have had a situation where India and the US have converged strategically on the Indo-Pacific and on the larger structural changes in the international system. And therefore, we have been able to work together irrespective of the governments, both in New Delhi and in Washington. I think when Mr. Trump came to power last time, when he came to White House last time, there was a lot of questions on the economy, because he was targeting India on the economic front, along with China. But soon he focused on China, and that gave India an advantage. I think what is certainly India is going to expect, and that may continue, and if that continues, then certainly the larger framework of India-US relationship would not be challenged. But I think given the domestic debate in the US and given the isolationist tendencies in the US, I think India will have to carefully navigate this space. On the one hand, America targeting China directly, on the other, America also looking more and more inwards at a time when perhaps India and America's partners need a more robust American engagement in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. So I think anywhere in between, India and the US relationship would shape up.
All right. Thank you very much, Harsh Pant and Pramit, for joining us on the program. It has been a great discussion. We're heading into a break at this point, but coming up on Global Eye, a pan-nation anti-quota protest has pushed Bangladesh to the edge. At least 39 people have been dead so far since the student protests have erupted in the nation, demanding the removal of quotas in government jobs. A discussion with Mubashir Hassan, author and human rights activist, when we return. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. Pan-nation anti-quota protests have pushed Bangladesh to the edge. Several people have been killed so far since protests took place across the country, demanding the removal of quotas in government jobs. And the protests have turned violent. University students are at the forefront of the unrest that has been going on for over 2 weeks now. Protests erupted after a recent High Court ruling reinstated 30% quota in civil service posts for children of freedom fighters who participated in the country's liberation movement in 1971. 56% of the government jobs in Bangladesh are reserved. The protesters want the 30% reservation for children of freedom fighters to be abolished. The nature of the protests rapidly turned aggressive over days, with protesters clashing with the police, disrupting operations of the state broadcaster, damaging key infrastructure. Police have fired rubber bullets and hurled sound grenades and tear gas shells to scatter protesters, who also blocked railway tracks and major roads. Clashes have also been reported between student protesters and student wing of the Awami League. The Bangladesh government has imposed severe communication curbs. Mobile internet access has been blocked and news broadcasts have been shut down. On your screen, you can see a local Bengali news channel abruptly going off-air. A number of news websites remain largely inaccessible. We're now joined by Mubashir Hassan, author and human rights activist. Mr. Hassan was born in Bangladesh and is currently settled in Australia. Dr. Hassan, let me begin by asking you, what do you think is making students across Bangladesh so angry? Because this issue had also erupted in 2018. At that time, Sheikh Hasina had scrapped these quotas. Now they have been reinstated. So Supreme Court has set this aside for the moment. Why is this issue erupting again? Is this the result of joblessness, poor state of the economy? What do you think is making the youth so angry?
So thank you, Portia, for inviting me. The situation is very concerning in Bangladesh. In answering your question, there are several factors that are integral to understand what is happening in Bangladesh. First of all, as you correctly said, there are not enough economic opportunity and employment opportunity for the youths in the country. If you see the surveys that is being conducted in the past decade, many surveys found that Bangladeshi youth are not really happy or hopeful about the future in the country. So the civil service jobs provides a job security, and for that reason, they wanted to have a fairer access to the civil service jobs based on their merit. That's number one. Second is that when they began the protest this time, the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina called them Rajakar. And, it's a very sensitive topic. Those who do not know the background, when Bangladesh was in liberation war against Pakistan, several Bangladeshis sided with the Pakistani military and participated in atrocity crimes against the Bengalis, and those Bengalis known as Rajakars. So that kind of hurled a moral humiliation to the students, and that made them angry. And
Right.
third, and importantly, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina did not provided an opportunity for these youths to elect her. As you know, the previous 3 elections in Bangladesh were neither free nor fair. So there was not enough options for these youths to vent their frustration or demand to the prime minister or demand to the state. Unlike India,
Right.
students could protest. So that kind of pushed them to the edge. And finally, the
Dr. Hassan,
alliance. Yes.
yeah, Dr. Hassan, what I would also like to ask you, do you feel that does this challenge the strength of Prime Minister Hasina as well? It is being said in certain global networks that there are winds of change afoot in Bangladesh, and these protests in a way are challenging her continuity as well.
I think look, if you analyze the reaction of Hasina's government to this protester, it's pretty brutal, right? If you look into the social media videos and footages, bodies are being dumped just on the streets. And this seriousness, a serious type of reaction from the state, which many human rights organizations would call very oppressive and brutal, would indicate that she is feeling threatened. So it is perhaps her intention to control it fiercely. I just wanted to say one thing which is quite important to understand. Previous years in Bangladesh, many people didn't speak up out of fear. So fear was an integral part of this government to persist. But what this Generation G or the young Bangladeshis have demonstrated for the past few weeks is that they broke free of fear. And authoritarian regimes thrive on fear. So I think that's what the government is getting a bit unsettled and decided to cut off all the communication so that they can reestablish the control. But the problem is they could control the movement for now, but human beings have also memories. And this young generation who grew up in post-1971 Bangladesh, for them, to millions of young
Right.
Bangladesh, I think her legacy is being severely tarnished.
All right, Dr. Hassan, we've run out of time, but we'd really thank you for joining us on our program, Global Eye, giving us your view on a very disturbing situation unfolding in India's neighborhood in Bangladesh. Let's see how the government addresses it. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18. News continues on the other side.